Okay, this is the mechanic killing games before they start. Design delve from Second Wind. The infamous juxtaposition gratification people. Let's see if they can get me spiced up again today. Oh my god, that's loud.
Oh, no, whatever shall I do? She has perished? Yeah, alright, Ludo, come on, we got a lot of work to do.
Okay.
You died, but now you're back, but with zero consequences. Yeah, it's cheap. It completely trivializes death.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think how games handle death and their fail states might be one of the single most important factors into how we keep our players engaged or drive them away. And I've seen
Sure, I can agree with that. Like, that is true. I've talked about that before. I'll bring it up again for this video, is that a death is a failure state. It is a failure state, and there are many different ways to do failure states. And when you punish the player in some form, either if they resurrect there, you've punished them by a few seconds, maybe. Okay, but that is still a punishment. It's just not a very big one. Some players are like, well, that's way too easy of a punishment. Some games restart you completely from the start, like arcade games, for instance, do that. When you fail an arcade game like Galaga or Pac-Man, you have to start all over, and in some cases, that is hours lost. Sometimes it's RNG based, and you didn't have anything you could control from that in the first place. So sometimes the death feels warranted, or it's like it's okay, and in some cases it's not. It largely depends on your market. What is your market expecting when they download a casual game and you have permadeath and the player has to start all over again? I promise you it's not going to go down well for the players. So how you handle your failure states is entirely up to how you see your market, in my opinion, how you see your market responding to those failure states.
so many games mismanaging this for the sake of convenience. But before we get into all of those sins, what makes death so important? Well, it's because of how it can dramatically affect how a player perceives a game. The fear of failing leads to a perception shift in the importance of the enemies and a player's own actions.
True.
It's all about investment. With the proper punishment, it can make enemies more imposing, victories and rewards sweeter, which is super simple, but managing how dramatic the punishment for death actually is can make or break your game in a heartbeat.
That's 100% true. And I think that for me, there's usually two things that I think are the most important things that if you fuck players with, they're not going to be happy with you. It's money and time, right? And if you have a failure mechanic that for the market of your game, the people playing your game, is too punishing, that's usually them saying, you've wasted my time. I expected to come home to play your game and enjoy it. I don't mind failure states, but what you have in the game has wasted too much of my time. And wasting players' resources, you could argue that that's kind of like a point in between time, right? It's like an obfuscation of time is like currency of how many souls you've obtained within Elden Ring when you die, right? It's a currency that represents, you could argue, the time that has been spent to obtain it. So when you lose a lot of runes, you are losing a lot of the time that you spent gaining those runes. So in a lot of cases, what you're losing is time, and for a lot of players, they expect that a specific game will not punish them with their time to a great degree. With casual games, that's the case. You know, we played Pacific Drive on stream, and Pacific Drive, when you lost your car, you could go to its husk, and you could loot a lot of the things that you lost. About 75% of them, I would say. And the time it took for you to get back there, and then come back with all your loot, it was significant, but it wasn't too much in my opinion. In Elden Ring, you can choose how you lose. That's true. That's true. But I would just say that, like, usually everything in the game revolves around time. And if players feel like their time hasn't been respected for what they expected from the game, then that's where that I don't think dissonance, but that's where that conflict occurs. Is feeling like your time has been lost in a way that you didn't expect it to be lost.
If the punishment is too harsh, potentially setting the player back hours worth of gameplay, it can immediately turn them off, leading them to blame the game's systems for being too harsh and encouraging them to quit. But on the complete opposite side of this coin, if the punishment for death in games is too light, it can lead to players feeling apathetic to the game's challenges and thinking,
like there's no challenge to the game.
Why should I bother? It's all about creating this Goldilocks zone of pressure, punishment and relief that keeps players engaged, and I have a few examples of this done immaculately and strangely, but to begin with, let's start with the game that kicked off this entire episode being made in the first place.
Okay.
So I was hanging out, you know, as you do, like a confused dragon sitting on a horde of unplayed games, and I feel this itch, so I peel this game off my scaly ass, and lo and behold, it's Little Nightmares 2. Well, I enjoyed the first one, so I decided to give it a go. Now, I want to preface this, I do like this game. Its art direction, atmosphere, and puzzle designs were incredible, but the way it handles death really got under my skin. No, not in a way that I think they hoped. Because it's a horror game, they want the fear of death to be palpable and a driving force to avoid enemies and solve puzzles hastily.
A lot of horror games suffer from this, where you're only scared the first time that it happens. It's why a lot of horror games are actually a lot easier than you think, because they rely on your fear to make mistakes and to ignore the ways that the game is making it easier for you to, like, let's say, escape or run away from an enemy. And you'll notice this in a lot of games where if you're like running away from an enemy, the closer it is, it gets a bit slower. And that's just to keep they want to keep the tension high, because that's where the enjoyment of the game comes from, is the tension, not when you die and then have to do the run section again. And the pacing and being pulled out of that tension has ruined the entire moment for you, right?
Instead of doing a system similar to most horror games like Alien Isolation, where save stations are separated by large gaps giving this rise of tension and release when you finally find one, they decided to respawn the player immediately and most of the time directly in front of where they perished. Now this just completely destroys any sense of fear the game could cling to. Those enemies that are intimidating and mysterious on first approach become simple mechanics and animations as you experience them over and over and over again without any sense of consequence. But the question is, why would they do this? Well, first and foremost, Little Nightmares 2 is a puzzle game, and being punished and having to go through multiple puzzles many times over yields no repeated reward moments and would suck an entire ass. So instead, they use death as a way to allow players to experiment and engage with puzzles repeatedly. But you really have to pick what you want. Do you want fear and tension, or easier puzzle accessibility? Because I actually think this leads to worse puzzle designs overall. Because the devs know that they can kill the players repeatedly without consequence, it turns puzzles into complete trial and error. You walk into a room, get insta-gibbed by a falling trap, and go, oh, well I guess I just won't walk over there then, I guess? It's not driven by decision making at all, it's a bait and switch, and you're the bitch. It's a bait and bitch. And
But it's an issue with that game's puzzles. It's an issue with Little Nightmares 2 specifically killing you out of nowhere, probably because either they knew, it's one or the other. They either knew that the death mechanic would be forgiving, so they designed puzzles like that, or because they designed puzzles like that, they then made the death mechanic very forgiving. I don't know which came first, right? It's the chicken or the egg thing like this.
repeatedly experiencing this made me question why death even exists in a lot of instances. And for example, in the game there's this gauntlet where you have to run through a bunch of enemies, and this is a pretty lengthy section, and when you get to the end of it, the game autosaves. But as you continue running, as most players would, there is a trap that immediately kills you, but then respawns you directly in front of the trap again.
It's not an issue with how the game handles death, it's an issue with how the game kills the player, if that makes sense. Like, it's just cheap, and it doesn't really make sense, and the player wasn't given any warning. At best, it exists as a jump scare and then kills the player, right? So it isn't that the game handles death poorly, or it handles what happens after death poorly, but it handles the causation of death poorly in just a really cheap and kind of annoying way.
And anyway, so the game builds up this tension, giving you immediate release when you succeed, but then instantly kills you afterwards unless you know what's coming, but then the kill has no consequence. So why is this trap here?
Yeah.
And these kinds of cheap kills were everywhere, repeatedly dying to the point where I just stopped caring. And for a more specific example where I am definitely just being a salty bitch, we can look at this rope, which honestly drove me a bit insane. See, now all you have to do is walk around these little broken boards and jump and grab this rope to go upwards. It's super simple, right? But
okay.
No, I jumped and fell. I thought because of the 2.5D perspective that this rope was all the way to the left, but it clearly wasn't because I fell. So as usual, I respawned at the entrance to the room, walked around and thought, well okay, maybe the rope is a little bit more to the center of the
I mean, for me, I immediately thought, okay, it's right where these books are, because that's part of the level design, is to show, here's the little ramp up.
I adjusted my aim and fell again. Respawn, adjust, fall. Respawn, adjust, fall. What?
Well, he's jumping through it. I mean, this is not a user issue.
Adjust.
Like, he's literally clipping through the rope. Let me guess, you have to stand here and press the grab button and it, like, snaps your character to it.
Fall. Respawn, adjust, fall. Why can't I grab this fucking rope? Why is this a problem? Why can't we just have a trigger volume here that says if the player is midair and they're grabbing, they attach to the rope? You use similar conditions to manage throwing objects, so why not here? What does the possibility of me repeatedly dying here actually do than just add frustration and lead the player to questioning why some of these things are designed the way they are?
It says down here, in hindsight, I believe this is an issue with the grab button conditions not being met whilst crossing over the rope's trigger volume. Well, this isn't a user problem. This is just a poorly made. This is something that a QA tester would find and report as being frustrating. This is a pain point, right? This is a user experience pain point. This needs to be fixed. It's a QA. It's kind of a QA problem, but I don't know if they had QA, but maybe QA reported it, but they never fixed it. So I don't know. It's just something that I know any competent QA would say is frustrating. So something went wrong here, and this doesn't seem to be the only case in this game. I don't know if I would say this is a problem with... Maybe I'm misinterpreting the point of the argument, but I wouldn't say this is a problem necessarily with death in the game. It's an issue. In this case, it's an issue with the game's coding, right? This is a pain point. It has nothing to do with death. The result is death, but it spawns from a really shittily made rope. Colton Chronicles won't have frustration, no climbing, right?
Isn't some intense chase scene or a puzzle to solve. It's a fucking rope. This honestly broke my brain.
I also would have put a blocking volume in front of in front of the let's just call it the floor. I would have put a blocking volume in front of that so the player can't walk off and they can hug it and know that they'll get to the rope. I also would have done that.
Along with the flippant disregard for death at every single turn made me want to do anything else. Now, would I have done any of this different? Probably not, because I guess that's just the way you need to tackle puzzle horror games. You're stuck between a rock and a hard place. No, this isn't just a problem with horror games. Yeah, they're always the prime example because they use fear in such a tactile way, but it extends into all games. It's not about a player feeling scared, but a sense of pressure and a mechanical consequence for them.
Yeah, exactly. And so for puzzle horror games, the average experience for a player in a section, like let's say a chase scene, should not be failure. The failure rate for testers, I would say, should be between 5 to 10% at most. And so you've succeeded with 90 to 95% of players at achieving that tension. The problem is that for the 5 to 10% that fail that chase scene, you've now ruined the tension. And it is kind of a rock and a hard place with that, but you need to know what you're trying to aim to achieve with a horror game, is that the horror doesn't come from dying and reloading the game, or I guess in the case of PT, it kind of, the repetition does. But either way, I think that is, you can use Outlast as a good example, or Resident Evil. The horror does not come from dying and repeating the same section. That loses tension. It pulls players out of that. Yeah, dying in a horror game kills the tension, 100%. It's a linear adventure. I feel some of the mechanics just locking you into a specific path would be good. Yeah, I think so too. I just think that Little Nightmares was a really shitty example it was a good example, but it was a really shitty development of the game. It was just handled in a poor way, that the puzzles and the way that death was caused just felt cheap. Like, nothing I did as a player caused the death. You literally it was like a D&D meme of rocks fall, everybody dies. That's literally what happened when he walked through the doorway. a bucket falls, you die, and you spawn right next to it. So what was the fucking point of it?
Their actions, and for some players, if they don't have that, well, why play? Now, for an example of how we can manipulate this thought process in real time, we can look to Dark Souls' soul system. As the player spirals ever deeper into these levels, their healing items dwindling and the amount of souls they've accrued increasing, the consequence for death grows with your progress, because if you screw up, all of those souls are lost.
Yeah.
And if you remove this consequence for death, you no longer have this tension, and you also eliminate the release you get for when you finally find a bonfire.
For bonfires, yes, I think that it works in the case of like bosses where you can, level up and you're like, I don't care if I lose my souls. So you still feel the tension of the fight, but now the tension of losing your souls is gone. And for a lot of cases, that helps you win the fight better because you don't have to have that in the back of your mind. So it is a psychological effect, yeah.
This rise and release are both intoxicating factors that keep players so engaged, but sometimes players have to die, I guess because they're just shit, which sucks for us because once the player does perish, this tension is killed as well. The player is no longer lost, they know the locations of traps, ambushes, know exactly where to go, so instead, From Software replaces it with a completely new way to build tension while also giving them a second chance. On death, instead of immediately allowing the players to blame the game for their failings or deciding to quit because of its harshness, they give them another chance by dropping their souls on the ground. And this seems small, but giving this chance for redemption also gives us a second way to build tension anew.
Yeah, because now it's like I have to get there, and if I don't get there, all my souls are gone. Yeah, it really is a brilliant way that From Software handled it, with giving the players a bit of risk versus reward. Or I guess risk in this case versus redemption. I think it's risk versus redemption. I think I agree. I think it's a great system.
You're now in a fight for survival as you make your way to your lost souls, knowing exactly what dangers lurk around every corner to rob you. The soul system keeps the player in this tension Goldilocks zone for as long as they can, and it alters how the players view the game as a whole because of how this failure state is managed.
Agree.
Removing any one of these things and the game would immediately suffer. Could you imagine if you dropped your souls permanently on death every time? Could you imagine if you didn't drop them at all? Both of these things would dramatically affect how the player viewed the game's world and its challenges in either direction. The tiniest details in how we manage this can completely alter how a player thinks. Actually, interestingly enough, I was in Prague last week discussing this very topic over a couple beers with Andrei Bidner. He's a senior game designer on Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 and 2, and the way they tackled this exact issue completely fascinated me. So in Kingdom Come, when you die you are set back a large portion of gameplay, but through alchemy you can brew something called Remedium Save Gamium. Yeah, absolute twats, which on consumption allows you to perform an autosave. These aren't hard to make or accrue, but it is a thought out process to actually do so. Bittner then explained that this all has an interesting knock-on effect on altering how a player approaches the game's challenges. Its inclusion forces players to...
I have not thoroughly played Kingdom Come Deliverance. I cannot speak about this mechanic. If you can summarize or get ChatGPT to summarize it for you, because I know that you get ChatGPT to run your whole life nowadays, Lazy Fangs, that would be appreciated.
Think, oh well, I should probably brew some potions to be able to save the game before this big battle that I know that's coming. Oh, then
and yes, I need to play the game, maybe on stream before number 2 comes out.
More. The simple inclusion of a punishing failure state encourages players to actually think before diving headfirst into whatever challenge they face, which makes each task more satisfying to complete and increases immersion at the same time.
Oh, so you brew a potion that saves the game when you drink it, is what it is. Costs a lot, or you need to craft so limited saves. Drinking it makes you drunk and full, so you can't act a while after you consume it. Makes you drunk and full? Does full have any negative effects? Because I assume drunk has obvious negative effects, but does full? So you're punished for saving the game? Why? God forbid you don't want to lose progress. I'm so sorry. So you gotta save, wait for it to wear off, or plan to do other shit? Passing out in a state where after you save fucks you over destroys a save. Oh, so when you're drunk, you pass out. And then if something like, if you load up in like a really stupid place or in like being attacked in a way that you can't get out of, you've basically saved and fucked over your save at the same time. Modded that shit away. Yeah, I would do the same thing. You save and sleep in someone's bed, you could wake up with guards humping your leg. So wait, okay. Hold on.
It's Yeah, absolute twats, which on consumption allows you to perform an autosave. These aren't hard to make or accrue, but it is a thought out process to actually do so. Bittner then explained that this all has an interesting knock-on effect on altering how a player approaches the game's challenges. Its inclusion forces players to think, oh well, I should probably brew some potions to be able to save the game before this big battle that I know that's coming. Oh, then if I'm going to do that, I might as well repair my sword and scout out the environment more. The simple inclusion of a punishing failure state encourages players to actually think before diving headfirst into whatever challenge they face, which makes each task more satisfying to complete and increases immersion at the same time. It's
How can he defend this? I mean, if you want to argue that, okay, you have an optional mode you can play, okay, hardcore mode, right? Alchemist mode, where you have to brew these potions or buy them in order to save the game. I could support it. The same stupid shit as Dragon's Dogma 2? Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it is, yeah. I could support it if it was an optional thing. But the fact that it makes you drunk and full and both of those have negative aspects is really stupid. Since it's an item it weighs in your carry capacity with armor, it's shit. I mean, I don't know what the community thinks of this, but was this a well-liked thing in the community? Was it controversial? So you had some people said it was great, some people not. At the very least, if I knew that I was implementing a mechanic that was considered controversial like that, that would be very easy to remove, by the way, because if you have a potion that saves the game in that spot, you have manual saves. It's just being triggered through an item. So I would literally just make an optional game difficulty customization for this. And if people want that hardcore mode, just like an Iron Man mode on XCOM, they can just toggle it on. Most downloaded? Okay, let me load up Nexus. I'm not logged in good, so I have not safe for work stuff turned on my account. Kingdom Come Deliverance. Unlimited saving 1.3 million. It's 500,000 more downloads than the fucking bow dot reticle. I will give you a good example of the same thing that hopefully I don't see. Please no, not safe for work mods. Please don't do it. Stop it. Stop it. Most popular all time. Level restrictions removal. Made by me. 400,000 subscribers. Same thing. Things that people think are controversial, they will mod out. And if they can mod it out, I would argue that that's a strong reasoning for the developers to implement that as a full game option. I don't see how the guy making this video can use this as a... It's unique. Sure, it's unique. That doesn't mean that it's good. I could support it as an optional item, but not with causing you to get drunk and full. That's like the lowest tier of Reddit ideas possible. Monster Hunter World made a thing that I praise very much. What do they do?
The same amount of gameplay, just framed in a player-driven way because of how they manage a failure state.
There are other ways you can do that. Just like, okay, you can only save in an inn like Dragon's Dogma does. I don't know, or just allow manual saves and just say if somebody wants to have that penalty put on them, they can. I mean, me being able to save Scum Baldur's Gate 3, you could argue that sure, it lessens the impact of some things, but that's a thing that I wanted to do. Because I don't like my time getting fucked over by RNG. And I imagine that Kingdom Come Deliverance has its own amounts of RNG that you can get fucked over by. These players, they created a full hotbar using all the number row. What does it have to do with death or saving, though?
Because let's be real, that's all we could ever want, our players to become immersed with all of the systems they have available to them to avoid failure. But to have that fear of death, it needs to be punishing, but not enough to break
I'm not
that
trying to be an
immersion,
asshole
encouraging them to quit. It's all about implying that sense of danger.
Okay, well, you want players to get more immersed, but you also don't want players to get frustrated, because by the time players get frustrated, now they don't like that aspect of the game. That's how you get 1.3 million downloads on a mod to remove the thing that you're praising. Immersion is not always a good trade-off for player experience. So devs listening to players and giving more options that matter. Oh, okay, so they didn't have that before. You have to assume that I don't know what was there before in this case. So they didn't have it before, but they created something specifically for PC players that provided a better user experience.
Oh, well, what I mean by that is, in an ideal situation, what we'd want to do is introduce the player to the concept of death and its harsh consequences to allow that tension and fear to build up, but then have them go into situations where they narrowly escape from death by the skin of their teeth, keeping this tension alive but not allowing them to die if they're playing to any reasonable degree. Well, we can do that in a lot of ways, like by using manufactured ludonarrative. We spoke about that in our episode on if health bars are ruining games. We can effectively deceive the player and present information and alter enemy AI in a way that makes it feel as if they're close calls, but in reality, they're a lot safer than they realize. And at the end of
I mean, I've seen a lot of games that do that. They give the player some damage resistance when they're low health, because the low health provides the tension. The tension is what provides the interesting gameplay. So you bank on the tension and you keep it up a bit longer. Same thing with like, well, no, not really, but that's exactly what I wanted to say with that. And the best armor in the game in a chest like 2 hours into playthrough. Kingdom Come Deliverance was 0 challenge. Hey, Panzer.
Of the day, it only matters
I didn't get very far
during play, not the actual reality of the stakes or difficulty.
So no, that is right. It does matter how you feel and not the actual stakes. It's true, you can trick the player, and a lot of games trick and manipulate the psychology of players to provide a better experience. As we've talked about before, game design is really just, it's about creating those emotions, and you can trick the player into creating those emotions. I don't think you need to legitimately create those emotions by fucking them over with a item that they have to make to save the game, and that fucks them over when they drink it.
Me, the best way to do this is to introduce the consequence of death, but then manufacture close calls to keep that illusion alive.
Yes.
Isn't that lying? Well, yeah, it is, but I'd argue that that's actually a good thing. Yeah, fuck it. Next episode's going to be called Why Game Devs Lying to You is a Good Thing, actually. Let's see how that does on Reddit. At the end of the day, putting the power back in the player's hands is always going to benefit your failure state. Be that with second chances with the soul systems or ways for the player to directly influence the chances of failure through player-driven systems. Both of these things don't eliminate the punishment for death, but put fate back in the player's hands, which is exactly what they want in this interactive medium. Who'da thunk it? But the real question is, what do you think? Has how a death state was managed ever made you quit a game or kept you engaged? How'd they handle that? Let us know down below, because we would love to discuss this with you. Alright, Ludo, say goodbye, you little lump. Okay, alright, bye guys.
What's an example of a death state? I actually think that earlier CC Best Game Notice, I actually think that what earlier Souls games did turn me off from some of the, it turned me off from the game because the death states were just a little bit too harsh for me. Like, I did find Demon Souls just a bit too punishing with its death system, that it wasn't making it fun for me to go back, and I vastly prefer what they've done with Elden Ring. It feels more fair, but still maintains that tension, so, they've been evolving that idea over the course of a long time. Some roguelike games, depends on which one. I mean, sometimes it depends on how cheap the death feels. or how controllable or how long the run got. So the longer the run is, of course it feels more frustrating when I die, but it also feels like I saw more of the game before I received the death. Ori and the Blind Forest had a harsh death state. You had to manually using mana put down a save. Look what Liza P did. They added attention by giving you a chance of regaining a heal if you parry an attack while despite being out of potions. Yeah. I think Darkest Dungeon, for me, was a game that I didn't like, and I understood why people didn't like the death mechanic. And it's actually one of the reasons why they added the resurrection mechanic back in with the Shrieker. Not the Shrieker. That was for Trinkets, the Resurrection Town event. And you could pick somebody from your graveyard to resurrect. And that would I think it would force that town event, or would greatly increase the chances for it to happen if you had a certain number of people dead in your cemetery. I remember there being something like that. So that was something that was just not fun for people, is because they lost they lost a whole bunch of progress and their favorite heroes to RNG, essentially. They didn't feel like it was warranted in a lot of cases. Like, the enemy got to move before them because the initiative was a D8 initiative system. And enemies and heroes had speeds of like 0 to 8. So in some cases, stacking a ton of speed on your character didn't actually result in that significant of an impact, when most of the variation came from the D8 system. And if they had moved that down to a D4 system, speed now matters a lot, and you can have higher predictability with your characters moving first. So I don't know. Death is an interesting thing. I do think that the way you handle death is good. I certainly wouldn't say that the way Kingdom Come Deliverance handles death was good, and that's clearly shown by the number of people that modded out. I guess okay. I guess okay. If you want to argue that's good, go for it. Here's the video if you guys want to watch it yourself. I will go from there. So thank you, YouTube, for watching that. Hopefully you enjoyed the reaction, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye, YouTube. Bye-bye. Bye.